Another module, another headache. I'm trying my hardest to get our staff to keep up with the market, but I swear I hear the whole office groan whenever I talk about upskilling. Plus, it's clear that no one's paying attention when watching. What do I do to help get people excited about learning and development again?
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Stein, clinical psychologist, emotional intelligence expert, and founder of MHS, a leading publisher of scientific, psychological assessments, and talent development solutions.
Upskilling. Is it a buzzword or is it here to stay? Let's find out with today's guest, the Learning Pirate. As we navigate a workplace filled with new technology and challenges, the need for continuous learning and upskilling has never been more critical. And while the focus may be on learning new software or working with AI, it's actually interpersonal skills that are going to help us keep up with the ever-changing demands of our workplace. Last season, we spoke with business executive Jeff Melanson about reskilling to help us stay competitive in our careers. From that conversation, it became clear that developing relevant skills in the workplace goes beyond just training and modules. We need to develop skills that teach us how to learn effectively. Our guest today is Lauren Waldman, but you may know her better as the Learning Pirate. She's an expert in learning design with a focus on using neurocognitive science to improve how we learn. Today, we'll dive deep into the art and science of upskilling, exploring how organizations can cultivate a culture of continuous learning in their offices. Hey, Lauren, so it's really great to meet you here today, and welcome to our podcast. We want to talk to you about upskilling. So why don't we start off by sharing a little bit about yourself and tell us how you became the Learning Pirate.
Oh, wow. That's quite the journey. I'd say the pirate started sometime around the age of 3 when I tried to steal my parents' station wagon with my older sister as my staff captain. But always had that curiosity. I think that's like where the pirate, from the little age came from. But then when I started the business, when I started learning pirate and knowing that I was coming back into an industry and a topic that I loved learning that very much needed to be shaken up and upskilled itself, the pirate was the way to sort of say, hey, we're about to navigate some new waters, and it's the pirate's here to tell you how to do that. So that's the pirate side. And then you've got the scientist side, in industry for many, many years as a learning development professional, and finally as a CLO, and prominently as an instructional designer who had her brain come knocking at her one day and said, hey, you know anything about me and all the things that you're doing to try to help people learn? And I was like, I don't actually. So off I went into getting my designations and my certifications in neuroscience, and almost a decade later, and here I am, scientific learning designer extraordinaire.
Well, I'm really interested in that. So tell me a little bit how the neuroscience fits into your learning background.
Taking away learning, even to begin with, Steve, when you understand how you operate as a fundamental human being, and when you're taught that, it changes everything. It changes the way that you communicate with someone, the way that you look at people, the way that you just do your work and all of it. So first it changed me as a very fundamental human being to start getting, I call it getting the operational pages of me. I knew what to do with myself. When it comes to work though, when we talk about learning design and that approach, there's so much to consider and to manage. But some of the key ones for me, one of the biggest ones is with focus and attention, because those play a massive role in our ability to design great learning and in someone's ability to absorb great learning. So when we think about attention and how many parts of the brain it's active in and how much processing it's doing, for stimulus, color, motion, sound, texture, shape, executive function as well, we're looking at a lot of cognitive function and a lot of cognitive resources. So when we're designing, Many learning designers and facilitators aren't aware of the fact that we don't have one attentional network. We have several attentional networks. And if we're not using these correctly, or if we're overutilizing them, we're working against our own abilities to focus. So if we at least know some very limited fundamentals, then we can make a significant difference in, like I said, not only the way that we're designing learning, but in the way that someone is absorbing it.
Well, I love that. As a psychologist, you're talking about things that we deal with all the time, but not in your context in learning, as we look at cognitive functioning and executive, functioning and all those kinds of things. But I'm really interested in how you apply it. So if you're designing a learning program and you're concerned about someone's ability to focus and follow through, where do you start? Like, how do you go about setting that up?
It's really about, how do I use those attentional networks effectively? If you're designing a program, something that we can use which sort of takes focus and attention, but it also uses primes and triggers. We can prime the brain to look for something intentionally. And you can do that with color, you can do it with sound. In a lot of the presentations that I give, the workshops or the keynotes, I'm cueing my audience's brains. Usually in my presentations, you'll see something highlighted in blue, and that's their cue. When I see something highlighted in blue, I'm going to direct my focus to that, because that's what she wants me to look at. But if I were to put blue on the screen and then green and then yellow, well, then which one is it that I really want someone to focus on? So if I'm priming the brain to search for that and then continuing to trigger that, then that's one way that we can govern someone's attention to focus. Other ways is novelty. Oh my gosh, the brain loves novelty. So when we put something in there that is unexpected, we've got two sort of major networks in the brain. We've got the dorsal attentional network and the ventral attentional network. And one of them is going to help us to, I like to describe it as the Where's Waldo. Although anyone from Europe, it's Where's Wally. So where's Wally? Or where's I learned that in this last tour, is how do if I want to use that particular network in the brain, well, then I'm asking it to look for something very particular, and I'm guiding it for that. But if I'm using the other network, it's using novelty. I like to say it as like the Jack in the Box, right? It's like, what's going to pop up that's going to grab your attention, and you're instantly going to be focused on it. So again, do I want to use a little bit of novelty and a little bit of surprise to grab someone's attention to focus? Or do I want to give them very explicit instructions on what it is that they're looking for?
So you mentioned a lot of the sort of the attentional focus and trying to, get attention and move attention. What about emotion? Does that fit into your training at all?
Emotion, yeah. I mean, emotions are nearly part of every cognitive function. So we definitely can't, we can't sort of dismiss emotions. But where I find what made a very significant difference to me was, even myself, is that definition behind emotion and a feeling. And those are two different things in the world of science, as you well know. So when we say emotions from, the neuroscience perspective, we're describing the chemical release. We're actually describing about chemical releases that are happening in the brain. It's that variety of the neurochemistry, which is then allowing us to have the tangible conscious experience of a feeling. And I think it's interesting when we describe that to people, because a lot of people will use those, feelings and emotions very interchangeably. One of the most powerful facts that I learned that kind of truly helped me to change how I'm in touch with my own feelings is the relationship between the emotional processing centers of the brain and the executive function. And I've got a colleague, Dr. Kate Truitt, she's absolutely brilliant. We call it the amygdala, the emotional processing centers. We call it Amy. And then I added Corey to the mix. We've got Amy representing our emotional processing centers. We've got Corey representing our prefrontal cortex and our executive function. And I think what's very empowering for all of us to know, which is how those two remarkable parts of the brain interact with one another. So when we have this understanding that, I'll just use Amy and Corey, we'll just personify these. But when we understand that Amy, your emotional processing centers, can act 4 times faster than Corey, blink of an eye, and take Corey offline, your executive function, which is your ability to be rational and to think clearly and to problem solve and governs your focus and part of your behavior. when we understand that when Amy is like fired up, she just goes ahead and takes Corey offline, and we're not working on a level playing field. So I think that how we are in touch with our emotions, and more so how do we monitor and regulate them, is a very powerful skill for us to have as human beings. Outside of our professional lives, we can integrate that into almost anything that we do.
Fascinating how our emotions can impact our ability to think clearly and make decisions. This really highlights the critical role emotions play, not just in our personal lives, but in our professional development as well. Emotional intelligence is the cornerstone of effective learning and upskilling, because when we're able to understand and regulate our emotions, we set the stage for more productive and meaningful growth. But how does that translate into the corporate world? Well, we can use this knowledge to help us with our development. I want to sort of move to one of the areas we want to focus on, which is upskilling. We hear so much in the corporate world about people being upskilling. They got to change. The world's changing. They got to move in directions. So what's your experience applying this learning to people who want to upskill?
That word upskill, it's so trendy. I think that, especially in my industry of learning and development, we love a good trend. We love a buzzword, and upskilling has definitely been one that's been so prominent. I know your emotional, or your reaction there of laughter just proves my point, is those buzzwords, whether it be upskilling, micro learning, macro learning, just all of it. And when really what's comical to me is we're still just talking about learning. So, if we have to use the word upskill as a rebrand just to get people to understand that we're still talking about learning, by all means, go for it. But I mean, to be honest, when I see resources changing when it comes to upskilling. I see the tools changing. Most recently we're dealing with like the tidal wave of AI, but I don't see the tactics. I don't see the methods, and I don't see the strategies changing when it comes to the human process of learning and memory. So I think that until we upskill there first, when we teach people a little bit more about how they work, like I said, can we give people some of the operational pages to the manual of themselves? Then I don't think it's going to matter what the next trend is, because the desired transfer, the desired skill of the behavior, the habit, and ultimately the results a business is after, they're going to fall short until we understand how do we work with all of these things so that we can transfer our human ability into the quote unquote upskilling that you're after, as far as the business results that you want.
Oh, that's interesting. So what you're saying is, learning hasn't really changed. The way we learn is the way we learn. We just keep calling it something new, and that that becomes popular. So when you mentioned AI, so how does AI fit into all this? Do you see that as just another buzzword, or is it really going to change the nature of training? Like, what do you think?
I think, the scientist in me is going to say it's definitely too early to tell. We see the way that it's influencing the workplace right now and the workforce, and I'm not necessarily sure that I can say it's in the most positive ways. We're seeing that it's doing a lot to expedite a lot of processes. When I look at it, though, through the context of how it's being used for learning, and then on the side of the work that I do in learning design, all I'm seeing is more content that's not great and not designed properly, but it's being produced a lot faster. So we're getting garbage in and garbage out, because at the end of the day, if the person who is inputting what they want into the system can't recognize if there is a flaw within what it's outputting, then we're just getting the same things over and over again. So I like to use this example of, I heard of these trainers. He said, okay, we're gonna go into ChatGPT, and we're gonna say, we would like you to design a program that is based on learning science, and we want you to do spaced repetition and interleaving and metacognition and all of these things. And I said, well, how are you going to be? I said, tell me about spaced repetition first, and tell me about interleaving, and tell me about metacognition. And they couldn't. I said, okay, so you know the terminology, but you don't know how it's used. So how are you going to gauge if this program, this generative AI, is giving you something that's effectively designed? Well, you don't know yet. So that sort of, kind of circles back to what we were saying before about upskilling, is if we don't upskill ourselves first, then how are we going to use these and be more discerning with what it's putting out?
I'm really interested in your use of neuroscience and the kinds of things you're getting called into. Like, what are the skills that people are looking for the most, or organizations that bring you in? Are they interpersonal skills? Are they technical skills? Like, where's your focus? Like, where are people calling you for?
It's all over the place. And because what we're dealing with is, is how do I help a human brain to cultivate X, Y, or Z? So some clients will call me and they've already got a program developed, but it's not hitting the mark. So we do a full audit on the existing program and we fill in those gaps. Now, I love doing that with the learning teams and the designers because it's an opportunity. I'll never go into a project and say, let me just fix this for you. I'm too much of a teacher and an educator. I said, let me work with you. Let me show you how the brain works and why this design can be enhanced based on the fact that maybe you haven't repeated enough, or you haven't had enough practice. There's no feedback in here, or you've hit the novelty bar too many times. And when you do that, the brain is going to bypass the actual learning because it's just looking for the reward. So it's such a wonderful, harmonious collaboration that I get to work with these teams to not only help them design more effectively, but then they get upskilled themselves while we collaborate because they're learning more about the scientific design process and they're also learning about the brain at the same time. There's so many different ways that we get to use what we know about the brain, not only for learning, but this really goes across any domain: marketing, sales, process improvements, health and safety, all of it.
So what's a really good example of an organization where you came in and made a positive change in the way that they learn?
So it's no secret, and I know this is kind of like funny now, as a learning pirate, but I did work on the cruise ships for a while. I was the training officer. The irony is not, lost on me. And I was transferred from one ship to another. And this particular ship, the compliance numbers were very low. And anyone who has been on a cruise ship, who has worked on a cruise ship, we know that it is so detrimental to having, safety of the passengers, of the crew, everyone. And it was my job to bring those up. And we're talking a crew of, it could have been at any time between 1,200 to 2,000 crew. So it's a lot. And any one of those crew, had we been inspected and had they not known, they could have said the wrong thing. And next thing you know, that ship's not going anywhere. So the stakes are high. And so very fortunately, they allowed me to redesign the learning, this experience of them, so that we could bring up our compliance numbers. And the way that we knew that we were being successful is because the fleet, every single ship, we can see where they are. So I could measure week by week where we were in the fleet and how our compliance numbers were going up. And it took me about 3 months to turn the ship around, not literally. That's the captain's job. But
I think there's a book out there about that called Turning the Ship Around. That's great.
But that was a very, it just proved that the way that they were being taught these things that were so important. And it could have been, I remember this one example, every couple of weeks, the crew would have our own muster drills. And that's when you have your own stations and you've got a crew. I maybe had 60 to 100 of the crew with me. And typically they've just got a sheet of like questions and answers, and they must know all of those answers to those questions. But as Steve, I'm sure you well know, rote memorization is not always going to be the key to learn for the long term. They could remember those things for the short term, but that wasn't helping their long-term memory. So I recontextualized everything that was on that sheet and made it so that it was more engaging for them, but ways that they could absolutely remember it. And we were, like I said, we got the compliance up within 3 months. And we stayed there. I was very proud to say that we not only stayed there in terms of our health and safety compliance, but as you can imagine, if you've ever cruised before, the guest experience is incredibly important. And we increased our guest experience as well. So that was I loved my crew. So it was really easy to go above and beyond for them. The softer side of skills, I think this one, to be honest, is probably one of the most touching and impactful programs that I've ever had the honor of designing and then facilitating. And it was for a local organization. We're both from Toronto. It was a local organization here in Toronto. and towards the tail end of the pandemic. And they were just struggling. People were just struggling in ways like, a psychologist, people were just struggling in ways that we could never have been prepared for. And myself and one of my board members, Dr. Chris Lee, we created a program called How to Human. It was the How to Human program. I'm sure, Steve, you saw during the pandemic, the plethora of, buy psychological safety off of a shelf. I'm like, oh, you just can't do that. We need to educate. We needed to educate. And so we had 50 managers in this organization who were supporting 500 employees. And it was hard. It was really hard. So this program, essentially what we developed was how to focus on 3 major areas, which was cognition, emotions, and behavior. And over the course of a few months, we designed this program to teach them about the inner workings of their brains at a very, foundational level. But we gave them the built-in practices and the methods that they could then implement after every session. First mastering these things for themselves and then transferring them to support their teams. And the impact, it was so significant. We were able to help people to understand how to monitor and regulate all of those 3 domains so that their stress didn't lead to burnout, which a lot of people don't really understand that stress is the road to burnout. Their empathy and their ability to effectively communicate not only with one another, but then to the clients that they were serving substantially went up, like over 70% when we did our qualitative data. And then they were able to work with more productivity because they were able to regulate all of these things. And ultimately, the true remarkable results was that these skills transferred over to how they were able to serve their clients. And these people themselves were coming from very hard situations. So I don't think, it's one thing to design a training program that does things like, like for the ships or to teach somebody a new process and procedure in a tech company or insurance, whatever it might be. When we designed something that impacted hundreds of human beings at a very fundamental human level, and then we saw how it transferred. I can say, and they still have the recording of this, the last session that we facilitated, I was in Calgary, and I had to run to a keynote, and I just let everyone know, I'm really sorry, everyone, I'm gonna have to leave early. And at the end of that session, they all turned their cameras on, and just the gratitude. I've never felt that type of impact from something that I've designed and delivered.
That's a great sort of way of evaluating your skill, right? Of how people appreciate you or show gratitude after. What are some of the other things you use to evaluate the outcomes of the programs that you do?
It's very indicative of what it is they want to evaluate. Is it behavior? Is it skill? Is it a change in process? What is it? But it's really, the evaluation has to be embedded within the program itself. So that's the very first sort of flaw that I see in designs, is that when you want to measure something, you have to be first very aware and focused on what it is that thing is that you're trying to measure. But one of the biggest misses that I find is that typically in a design, in a program, everyone wants to measure at the end. And therefore, you can get to the end of a program and realize people didn't actually learn or remember, more importantly, they didn't create a memory for something in order to be able to transfer it.
What role do the managers and leaders play in sort of promoting a learning culture and getting their teams involved?
We hear this a lot, right? Is they play a large role in promoting it, but I think they play an even bigger role in demonstrating it. I think, there shouldn't be, in my sort of human mind, is when it comes to learning, obviously we're going to have different needs and different things that we need to learn, but it's how are you participating in that learning and how are you showing that you're doing it yourself and not just mandating it from the top. And I think that's a really big distinguish between company cultures that have a more embedded, strong learning culture are the ones where the learning is being shared amongst everybody, because sometimes the best thing that you can do is to remove the title. I'm not your manager. I'm not the senior vice president of X, Y, or Z. I'm a human being who needs to learn something.
So, I'm amazed with the wide range. You've done everything from technical skills, psychological safety, interpersonal skills. So looking at this whole picture with your experience, what are the most important skills in learning that you're seeing out there today? What's the need? What are people looking for?
It's interesting because it's what they're not looking for, which is what they need the most. And that is, and this is it. They're looking for content libraries. They're looking for AI solutions. They're looking for, the micro learnings. They're looking for all of that. But to circle back to where we began this conversation, is they're not looking at the actual skills that we need as human beings to be able to succeed in all of those others. So, I mean, I'm sure you see this as well, Steve, with your work. I love it when we go into an organization and they've got very, very grand ideas of change that they want to see. And it's usually behavioral in one way, sense, or form. And I said, oh, fantastic. How does one change a behavior? But you expect somebody to change that behavior, but we were never taught how to change that behavior. So do you see how you've put the cart before the horse? So in my, I'm sure you've seen this too.
Absolutely. All the time.
So I think once we start bringing this awareness, it's a very conscious awareness to the fact that we all know how to learn because we are designed as human beings to do such things. If not, we wouldn't have made it very far past, a toddler. We would have, walked into the fire or, off the cliff or wherever it was. Mm-hmm. But we can't automatically assume just because we went through an educational system, which is, very much in need of upskilling itself. 300 years of doing it the same way doesn't mean that we're doing it the right way anymore. So that's where I'd say is start upskilling us.
Let's look for a second at the contributor in the organization, someone who's working somewhere and they realize that they've really got to learn. They got to find how to deal with things differently to get ahead in the organization. What would you advise the individual contributor in an organization if they want to take more control of their learning journey?
Well, first find me. And then,
that's a good start, I'm sure.
That's the step one. Find a pirate who knows science. No, we're few and far between, so that's kind of hard. I think the easiest way is for the individual first to take ownership is for them to start assessing how they learn. So first recognize when we think about it, I've asked this question, Steve, to thousands and thousands of people at this point globally. And it's a question that's in our series as well, which is, one, did anyone ever teach you how to learn? The answer is usually no. And then for the 1% of people go, yeah, someone taught me how to learn. I go, oh, okay. Did someone ever teach you about your brain? Oh, hand goes down immediately. I'm like, well, what do you think is the thing that's doing all of it? So you don't have to go into the depths of the world like I did. But if you want to, start really taking some more ownership, start by assessing the ways in which you learn. Like really take a look, learn a little bit about metacognition and metacognitive ability. I use my own terminology is how do you become the audience to your own performance? And if you can do that and sort of then assess, are these strategies the ones that I've done since, I don't know, elementary school? Are these getting me to the place that I want to be? Or am I doing it because that behavior is so strongly encoded in my brain, in my beautiful neural networks, that it feels uncomfortable to go and try it a different way. But sorry to break it to you, friends, but that's learning. It's hard. But start with assessing your own strategies and methodologies, and then start making some adjustments.
Well, in terms of that, I assume most people, learn the way they were taught in school, as you say, which is outdated, right? So that a lot of people don't even know where to look. Like, how would I discover these new ways of learning?
There's so many different ways. So a lot of what you'll find when you do a search, if you're doing strategies or learning science, a lot of the current methodologies are still highly grounded in cognitive psychology. And makes sense. Psychology has been around for a lot longer than neuroscience. But there is a beautiful, powerful combination when we bring the two together, when we understand how the brain is impacting the mind and the methodologies of the mind. So shameless plug, but I didn't create it for nothing. I created a series that harmonizes the two. It's called Joining Forces with Your Brain. And it will teach you not only about how your brain is operating and give you some great experiments and methodologies to help you to learn how to focus a little bit better, but then also teach you, well, what is metacognition? And just like we were talking about, it will help you and guide you to start understanding where your strategies currently are, but some new ones and quite honestly, probably some better ones that you can start using as well. So you can look at Joining Forces with Your Brain. Was it David A. Sousa wrote a book back in the day called How the Brain Learns. It's a great entry level one as well. So I'd say, there are lots of resources out there. Don't get too overwhelmed with those. But for me, the harmonization of how your brain works and the learning methodologies is for me, that's gold, it's why I created the resource that I wish I would have had. And now we've got, hundreds, thousands of people going through the journey.
So we end every conversation this season with our guests by asking them this one question.
Okay.
And the question is, if you had to pick one word to describe the future of work, what's the one word you would choose?
I'm going to use the word repetitious. And I'm using that word because I feel like if we don't start changing the way that we do things now, we're going to see a lot of the same in the future.
I didn't expect repetitious for something that's going to be new and in the future. But I guess you got to plug with what works and what you know and what your experience shows you.
Well, I don't want it to make it sound like, the future is dismal. It most certainly is not, especially with the hunger of this next generation who are so much more consciously aware of who they are as human beings. So they got access to all of this wonderful information. But, historically, and especially in the environments that I work with, I don't see enough changing for it to look significantly different unless we start taking those actions now.
Wow. Okay. Well, there's going to be a lot of work for you ahead. I can see that right off the bat. This has been fascinating, Lauren. Really enjoyed speaking with you today and getting my neurocognitive neurons going and learning all kinds of new things about how we learn. It's been great meeting you, and thanks for being with us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
I really enjoyed speaking with Lauren. Our conversation showed that if our goal is upskilling, we should actually start with learning about ourselves. Successful learning programs address the foundational elements of cognition, emotion, and behavior. That allows us to manage stress, enhance empathy, and improve communication. Lauren also shared invaluable insights on embedding assessments throughout the learning process, ensuring that the knowledge and skills gained are truly impactful and long-lasting. As leaders, it's up to us to meet our teams where they are, and having the tools to measure their preferences and learning styles can be a great place to start. If you'd like to learn more about Lauren and her work, we link Lauren's website in our show notes. Make sure to also check out information on helpful tools and assessments that your organization can use to maximize your upskilling investment. Also, make sure to subscribe and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon for another episode of Work Therapy.